Delivering this week's must-watch workplace storylines, this is Bloomberg Law's Punching In, for those of you listening in Washington and across the globe.
Hey folks, thanks for punching in with us. It is obviously the week after elections, and we will definitely be getting back to that before the end of the episode. But first, we will be kicking off today with a conversation with my colleague, Jaclyn Diaz. Hey Jaclyn, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. Jaclyn's here to update us on some moves from late last week out of the Department of Labor. I believe there were two rules from the Obama era, if I'm not mistaken, that were walked back a bit. So tell us a bit about the first one, which is called the 80-20 rule, Jaclyn.
Sure. So this week, the Labor Department issued guidance that undid a controversial rule for tipped workers. The rule was called 80-20 and mandated tipped workers have to be paid the full minimum wage on work they do that doesn't generate tips, like making coffee, if that work makes up at least 20% of their weekly hours. This policy was implemented in the Obama administration, but actually goes back to an original interpretation from the Reagan administration.
That's interesting. Yeah, that sort of reminds me of our little walk back of a tip worker policy here in D.C. as well. A wage measure for restaurant workers here in D.C. that was successfully walked back. And tell us a bit about the second rule you covered last week, Jack, and that's this Department of Labor rule concerning immigration, if I'm correct.
Yep, so the department proposed two rules that would require employers who use H-2A and H-2B visa programs to post their jobs online before they can hire foreign workers.
And I'm actually super glad you said those acronyms yourself, Jaclyn. I always sort of confuse them. But what I do remember is that those programs are both to allow employers to hire seasonal workers. And I remember that because there's some coverage of the president using these programs at Mar-a-Lago to hire seasonal workers like cooks and to fill other positions like that. Now, this actually featured in some, these same visa programs actually featured in some reporting you put out today, I think based on the calendars of some folks over there at DOL. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So I learned from a FOIA request from the calendars of Keith Sonderling, the senior policy advisor at the DOL, some background information on, the timeline of when these policies were being discussed at the department. So I found that on the 80-20 rule, it had been a subject of discussion within the department since fall of 2017. And the calendar showed 3 meetings held in October and November of 2017 about reinstatement of 2009 with withdrawn OLs, which would be the 2009 opinion letter saying tipped workers don't need to be paid the full minimum wage for side work.
Gotcha. And we will definitely be checking in with you again because as your reporting here shows, what the agenda on these folks' calendar sort of lays out a roadmap of what they're working on and what rules and regulations are likely to be issued or withdrawn in the future. So thanks for joining us, Jaclyn.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
And now back to our continuing elections coverage, midterm elections, for our second item. We, of course, know the results now of how the midterm elections shook out. The Republicans did keep their hold on the Senate majority. The big story, naturally, is that the Democrats were successful in flipping the House. The obvious question for us here at Punching In and our listeners is, what's this mean for labor policy? Practically, the Democrats will control the labor panels in the House. More than likely, certainly my money is on it. Congressman Bobby Scott, he represents one of the blue corners there in Virginia, will head that panel. The first major thing here to keep in mind is that controlling the panel means the Democrats now have oversight power, right? They can call in department heads for questioning. They can subpoena documents. And a lot of that will be aimed at trying to find out justifications, underlying data, studies that support different policies that have come out of the Trump administration, including the various policies or sort of the walking back of Obama-era policies that Jaclyn and I just discussed. So we can definitely expect to see a ramping up of those oversight efforts of the labor agencies. Now, we actually did catch up with Congressman Bobby Scott to get a preview of what the Labor Democrats' agenda might look like going forward. And there'll be more on this in the column, but the one thing to highlight, the major thing Congressman Scott talked to us about was that he'll be pushing to introduce a measure to raise the federal minimum wage to $15. Now, of course, as we said, they do have the numbers in the House now to come up with something and move it forward. What we don't know if there'll be a conservative in the Senate that'll be willing to cross the aisle and sign on to a measure like that. So we'll definitely be following those efforts and keep you up on that eventual bill and every other move coming out of this new labor panel. All right, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks for punching in with us for the Labor Desk's Monday Morning Musings. For more coverage, be sure to check out our website where the Punching In column is hosted. That's news.bloomberglaw.com. And of course, you can always follow me on Twitter at Hassan Kanu. See you next week.